The morning Cora Bennett watched her husband die in their small cabin outside Taos, New Mexico territory, she learned that some kinds of cold have nothing to do with winter. It was August of 1873, and the summer heat made the single room feel like an oven, but Thomas shivered under every blanket they owned. The fever had taken him in 3 days, burning through his body like wildfire through dry grass. He was 26 years old. She was 23. They had been married for 2 years, and now she knelt beside their narrow bed, holding his hand as it went slack in hers. The doctor from town had come and gone, taking most of their savings with him and leaving nothing but a sad shake of his head. Typhoid, he had said. Nothing to be done. Cora had sent word to Thomas's brother in Santa Fe, but by the time the letter would arrive and anyone could make the journey, it would all be over. She was alone when Thomas took his last breath, alone when she closed his eyes, alone when she walked outside and stood in the blinding sunlight, wondering what she was supposed to do next. Their cabin sat at the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, a full day's ride from Taos proper. Thomas had been a trapper, though not a particularly successful one. He had been kind and gentle, and Cora had loved him in the comfortable way of two people who had known each other since childhood in Missouri and had decided that marriage made practical sense. But kind and gentle did not fill a smokehouse with meat or line a purse with coins, and now Cora stood looking at a cabin that needed repairs, a small vegetable garden that was barely producing, and a future that looked as empty as the blue sky overhead. She buried Thomas herself in the rocky soil behind the cabin. It took her most of the day, and her hands were bleeding by the time she finished. She marked the grave with stones and stood there as the sun set, wondering if she should pray. She tried, but the words felt hollow in her mouth. Instead, she told Thomas she was sorry, though she was not entirely sure what she was apologizing for. Sorry he had died. Sorry she did not feel more broken. Sorry that she had no idea how she was going to survive alone in this harsh country. The next morning, she took stock of what she had. Some flour, some cornmeal, a bit of salt pork, coffee that would last maybe another week. No money except for $3 silver Thomas had hidden in a tin under the floorboards. No family within 1,000 miles except for that brother in Santa Fe who probably would not come even when he got the news. Thomas had never spoken fondly of him. The rifle over the door was hers now, along with a dozen cartridges. She had shot it before, enough to know which end to point away from herself, but she was no marksman. She should go back to Missouri, she thought. She should pack what she could carry and make her way to Santa Fe and book passage on a stage heading east. But what waited for her there? Her parents were gone, claimed by cholera when she was 19. Thomas had been her escape from an aunt who considered her a burden. Going back meant admitting defeat, meant living on charity, meant giving up the small piece of independence she had claimed when she married and moved west. The sound of Mules braying startled her from her thoughts. Cora grabbed the rifle and went to the door, her heart hammering. Visitors were rare out here, and a woman alone was vulnerable in ways she was only beginning to understand. What she saw made her lower the rifle slightly, though she kept it ready. A man was coming up the path leading 3 mules laden with bundles that she recognized as Pelts. He was massive, broad across the shoulders and chest, with arms that strained against his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see his eyes, a striking blue-gray that seemed almost pale against his sun-darkened skin. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his entire life in the wilderness, every step deliberate and sure. He stopped a respectful distance from the cabin and raised one hand in greeting. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and rough from disuse, but not unkind. "Morning, ma'am. Name is Ezra Callahan. I trapped these mountains. Saw smoke from your chimney yesterday and thought I would stop by, see if Thomas needs any help with anything before I head into Taos to trade these pelts." Cora swallowed hard. Thomas is dead. Fever took him 3 days ago. Ezra Callahan's expression shifted, surprise followed by something that looked like genuine sympathy. He glanced at the fresh grave she had covered with stones, visible from where he stood, then back to her. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. That is a hard thing." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. There was something about his presence, solid and calm, that made her feel simultaneously safer and more aware of how fragile her situation was. "You have family coming?" he asked after a moment. "No," she said. "It is just me." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those pale eyes. She had the sense he was taking in everything: the disrepair of the cabin, her too thin frame, the rifle that shook slightly in her hands. Finally, he nodded as though he had made a decision. "This is not a good place for a woman alone," he said. "No offense meant, but you will not last a month out here. Winter comes early in the mountains, and it comes hard. You have supplies?" "Enough," she lied. His expression suggested he did not believe her, but he did not argue. "I am heading into Taos now. Should be back this way in 4, maybe 5 days. If you are still here, I will check on you. If you decide to head into town, I am sure there are folks who would help you get to wherever you need to go." "I will be fine," Cora said, lifting her chin, "but I thank you for your concern." Ezra Callahan looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he touched the brim of his hat and clicked his tongue at the mules. Cora watched him walk away, his broad back straight, his stride never faltering under the weight of the packs and the altitude. He disappeared around the bend in the path, and she felt the loneliness settle over her again like a heavy cloak. She spent the next 4 days trying to figure out what to do. She shot at a rabbit and missed, wasting a precious cartridge. She set snares like she had seen Thomas do, but caught nothing. The garden yielded a few scrawny carrots and some beans that were more hull than meat. She rationed what food she had, but she could feel herself getting weaker. At night, the cabin felt too big and too empty. She lay in the bed where Thomas had died and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the wilderness outside, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves making her grip the rifle tighter. On the 5th morning, she woke to the sound of mules again. She went to the door and saw Ezra Callahan coming up the path, this time with his mules empty of pelts but loaded with supplies. He stopped in the same spot as before and met her eyes. "Morning, ma'am. Thought I would check on you like I said." Cora wanted to be proud, to tell him again that she was fine, but the words would not come. She was so tired, so hungry, so scared. She felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for it. Ezra dismounted and tied the mules to the porch rail. Up close, he was even bigger than she had thought, easily 6 inches over 6 feet, with muscles that spoke of years of hard labor. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes were kind as he looked at her, and his voice was gentle. "How much food do you have left?" She hesitated, then told him the truth. "Maybe 2 days' worth, if I'm careful." He nodded as though he had expected as much. "I brought some things. Jerky, cornmeal, beans, coffee. Also some fresh meat. Shot a deer yesterday. You can have half." "I cannot pay you," Cora said, her voice breaking. "Did not ask you to," Ezra replied. He began unloading supplies from the mules, setting them on the porch with efficient movements. Cora watched him, torn between gratitude and humiliation. When he finished, he stood looking at her, his expression serious. "Baked you." "Ma'am, I do not mean to speak out of turn, but you need to make a decision. You can stay here and try to make it through the winter alone, which I will tell you straight is not likely to end well. Or you can go back east, back to wherever you came from. Or," he paused as though weighing his words, "you can come with me." Cora blinked. "Come with you?" "I have a cabin about 10 miles north of here, deeper in the mountains. It is sturdy, well stocked. I do well enough with my trapping to keep 2 people fed through the winter. You could stay there, help with the work, and when spring comes, you can decide what you want to do next." "I would not," he paused again, his ears going slightly red beneath his tan. "I would not expect anything improper. You could have your own space. I just figure it is better than starving or freezing out here alone." Cora stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. It was scandalous, of course, a widow living with a bachelor in a remote cabin. If anyone in Taos found out, her reputation would be destroyed. But then, what did reputation matter if she was dead? And there was something in Ezra Callahan's face, a straightforward honesty, that made her believe he meant what he said about expecting nothing improper. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me." "No," he agreed, "but I know what it is like to be alone in this country, and I know what happens to people who are not prepared for it. If I can help, Seems like I should. Cora looked back at the cabin, at Thomas's grave with its pile of stones, at the life she had tried to build here that had crumbled so quickly. Then she looked at Ezra Callahan, at his steady gaze and his patient stance, waiting for her answer. "All right," she said quietly. "I will come with you." Over the next 2 days, Ezra helped her pack what little she wanted to keep. Some clothes, a few books, a quilt her grandmother had made, the rifle and ammunition, a tintype photograph of her parents. Everything else, the furniture and dishes and tools, he said they could sell in Taos when they had the chance. He was gentle with her belongings, careful not to touch anything without asking first, and Cora found herself watching him as he worked, noticing the way his muscles moved under his shirt, the competent efficiency of his hands, the way he never seemed hurried or frustrated. On the morning they left, Cora stood by Thomas's grave for a long moment. Ezra waited by the mules, giving her privacy. She wanted to feel something profound, some great wave of grief or love, but mostly she just felt tired. She touched the stones one last time and then walked away without looking back. The journey to Ezra's cabin took most of the day. They climbed higher into the mountains, following trails that Cora would never have seen on her own. Ezra led the mules with sure steps, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about loose rocks. He did not talk much, but Cora did not mind. She was not ready for conversation. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing the thin mountain air, on not thinking about how her entire life had changed in less than a week. When they finally arrived at Ezra's cabin, the sun was low in the sky, turning the mountains gold and purple. The cabin was larger than the one she had left behind, built of thick logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it was a lean-to for the mules and a smokehouse. A stream ran nearby, clear and cold from snowmelt higher up. It was beautiful in a stark, wild way that made Cora's throat tighten. Ezra showed her inside. The cabin was one large room, but it had been divided cleverly. A sleeping area with a real bed in one corner, a table and chairs near the fireplace, shelves lined with supplies, traps, tools. Everything was neat and organized, which surprised her. She had expected a bachelor's mess. "You can have the bed," Ezra said, setting her belongings down carefully. "I will rig up a hammock in the other corner. There's a curtain I can hang for privacy." "I cannot take your bed," Cora protested. "You can and you will," Ezra said firmly. "It is not up for discussion." Cora was too tired to argue. She watched as Ezra moved around the cabin, starting a fire in the hearth, hanging the promised curtain on a rope strung across the room, pulling out supplies to make supper. He moved with the confidence of a man completely comfortable in his space, and Cora felt like an intruder, a disruption to his solitary life. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked as he set a pot of stew over the fire. Ezra glanced at her, then back to the pot. "I like the quiet. People," he paused, searching for words. "People are complicated. Mountains are not. You know where you stand with mountains." "That is a lonely way to live," Cora said softly. "Maybe," Ezra agreed, "but it is honest." They ate in silence, and Cora had to admit the stew was the best thing she had tasted in weeks. Ezra was clearly a competent cook, another surprise. When they finished, he cleaned the dishes and then excused himself to tend to the mules. Cora sat by the fire, feeling the warmth seep into her bones, and wondered what she had gotten herself into. That night, lying in Ezra's bed with the curtain pulled for privacy, Cora listened to the sound of his breathing from the other side of the room. It was strange, being so near to a man who was not her husband, but it was also comforting in a way she had not expected. For the first time since Thomas died, she did not feel completely alone. The days developed a rhythm. Ezra woke before dawn and made coffee, the smell pulling Cora from sleep. They ate breakfast together, usually biscuits and bacon or cornmeal mush, and then Ezra would head out to check his trap lines. He had dozens of them scattered through the mountains, and he would be gone for hours, sometimes the whole day. Cora stayed at the cabin and worked. She cleaned, though the place was already cleaner than she expected. She cooked, experimenting with the supplies Ezra had stocked. She mended his clothes, which desperately needed it. She tended the small garden he had planted, which was doing better than hers had thanks to better soil and more consistent care. At first, they barely spoke. Ezra was not a talkative man, and Cora was still processing her grief and her new circumstances. But slowly, In small increments, they began to open up to each other. Ezra told her about growing up in Ohio, the youngest of 6 children. His parents had been farmers, poor but hard-working. When he was 16, his father had died, and his mother had quickly remarried a man who had no use for stepchildren. Ezra had left home and headed west, working odd jobs until he discovered he had a talent for trapping. He had been in the New Mexico territory for 8 years now, and he could not imagine living anywhere else. Cora told him about Missouri, about losing her parents, about Thomas. She found herself being more honest than she had intended, admitting that her marriage had been more practical than passionate, that she had come west looking for adventure and found mostly hardship. Ezra listened without judgment, his pale eyes thoughtful, and Cora appreciated that he did not try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. As the weeks passed, Cora began to notice things about Ezra that she had not seen at first. The way he was endlessly patient with the mules, talking to them in a low, soothing voice. The way he always brought her small gifts from the wilderness, a handful of wild berries, an interesting rock, a feather from a hawk. The way he laughed, which was rare but genuine when it happened, a deep rumble that made her want to smile. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, a soft expression that made her heart do strange things in her chest. She also noticed the physical things, which she tried not to but could not help. The way his muscles flexed when he chopped wood, the sheer power in his arms and shoulders, the way his hands, so large and scarred, were surprisingly gentle when he handled delicate things, the way he moved, all controlled strength and easy grace despite his size. She found herself watching him more than she should, and she felt guilty about it. Thomas had been dead only a few weeks. She should not be noticing another man, should not be feeling the small flutter in her stomach when Ezra smiled at her. One evening in late September, Ezra came back from his trap lines with 3 fat rabbits and a satisfied look on his face. Cora had made bread that day, her first successful batch in the cabin, and the smell filled the room. Ezra stopped in the doorway and inhaled deeply, a smile crossing his face. "That smells like heaven," he said. "It should," Cora replied, feeling absurdly pleased with herself. "I only burned 2 loaves before I got it right." Ezra laughed, and the sound warmed her more than the fire. They prepared supper together, working around each other in the small space with an ease that had developed over the weeks. Cora skinned the rabbits while Ezra made a pot of beans. They talked about his day, about the signs of winter he had seen, about the pelts he was accumulating for his next trip to Taos. "I will need to head into town in about 2 weeks," Ezra said as they ate. "Probably be gone 3, maybe 4 days. Will you be all right here alone?" Cora nodded, though the thought of being without him made her uneasy. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the security of having him near. But she was not helpless. She could shoot now, having practiced with Ezra's patient instruction. She knew how to keep the fire going, how to care for the mules, how to defend herself if needed. "I will be fine," she said, "but I will miss the company." Ezra looked at her across the table, his pale eyes searching her face. "I will miss it too," he said quietly. Something hung in the air between them, unspoken but palpable. Cora felt her breath catch, felt the cabin suddenly seem smaller and warmer. Ezra looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he stood and began clearing the dishes, and the moment passed. That night, Cora lay in bed and admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling in love with Ezra Callahan. It was not the comfortable, practical feeling she had had for Thomas. It was something deeper and more intense, something that made her heart race and her hands tremble. She did not know what to do about it. She did not know if Ezra felt the same way, though she suspected he might based on the way he looked at her. And she did not know if it was wrong to feel this way so soon after losing her husband, though her heart insisted it was not wrong at all, that Thomas would have understood, that life was too short and uncertain to deny what she felt. The next morning, Cora woke early and found Ezra already up, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. She poured herself a cup and joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light spill over the mountains, turning the aspen trees gold and amber. "It is beautiful up here," Cora said softly. "It is," Ezra agreed. He hesitated, then added, "It is better with you here." Cora looked at him, her heart hammering. Ezra was still watching the sunrise, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set as though he was bracing for rejection. "Ezra?" she said, and he turned to face her. Up close, she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the small scar on his cheekbone, the way his beard could not quite hide the softness of his mouth. "I am glad I am here too." Something shifted in his expression, hope mixed with caution. "Cora, I do not want to overstep. You have been through so much, and I do not want to make things harder for you. But he paused, struggling with the words, I care about you. More than I should, probably. And if you do not feel the same way, that is all right. You can stay here as long as you need, and I will not bother you about it. But I thought you should know." Cora set down her coffee cup and stepped closer to him. Ezra was so tall that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He looked nervous, this big, strong man who faced down bears and mountain lions without flinching, nervous about what she might say. "I care about you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that terrifies me." "Why?" Ezra asked, his voice rough. "Because I do not want to betray Thomas's memory, because I do not want to be a burden, because I do not know how to do this, how to start over, how to let myself feel happy again." Ezra reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle despite his strength. "Thomas is gone, Cora. Mourning him is right and proper, but you are still alive. You deserve to be happy, and you are not a burden. You make this place feel like a home instead of just a cabin. As for starting over," he squeezed her hand, "we can figure it out together, if you want to." Cora felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. She nodded, unable to speak, and Ezra pulled her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. His arms came around her, strong and secure, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Cora felt safe. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun rose higher and the day began. When they finally pulled apart, Ezra cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness that Cora felt her breath catch. "I'm going to court you properly," he said. "I know we are living in the same cabin, which is not conventional, but I want to do this right. I want you to know that I respect you, that I value you, that I am not just looking for convenience, or," he trailed off, his ears going red. "Or a warm body in your bed," Cora finished, a small smile tugging at her lips. Ezra looked mortified, and Cora laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "I appreciate that, Ezra, and I want to do this right too." From that day forward, everything changed and yet stayed the same. They still maintained their routines, still slept on opposite sides of the cabin with the curtain between them. But now there were small touches, a hand on her shoulder as Ezra passed by, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee. There were longer conversations, sitting by the fire in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. Ezra told her about the wilderness, teaching her to read the signs of weather and animals. Cora told him about the books she loved, and Ezra listened with genuine interest, even though he had never been much of a reader. Ezra courted her with the resources available to him. He brought her wildflowers, tough mountain blooms that survived in the harsh climate. He carved her a small wooden box for her keepsakes, the lid decorated with an intricate pattern of leaves. He took her on walks through the mountains, showing her the places he loved, teaching her to move quietly through the forest. Cora had never been courted like this, with such quiet intensity and genuine care. Thomas had courted her with church socials and awkward conversations on her aunt's porch. This was different, raw and real, and she found herself falling deeper every day. One afternoon in early October, Ezra took her to a high meadow where the aspen trees were in full autumn glory. The leaves shimmered gold in the sunlight, and the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers making their last stand before winter. They sat on a fallen log, and Ezra pointed out the different peaks surrounding them, telling her their names and the stories associated with them. "That one there," he said, gesturing to a particularly sharp peak, "is where I got caught in a blizzard my first winter here. I thought I was going to die. Ended up huddled in a cave for 2 days before it cleared enough for me to make it back down." "You must have been terrified," Cora said. "I was," Ezra admitted, "but I also remember thinking that if I was going to die, at least it would be in a beautiful place. A lot of people do not get that." Cora was quiet for a moment, then said, "I thought I was going to die in that cabin after Thomas passed, not physically maybe, but in every way that mattered. You saved me, Ezra." "You saved yourself," Ezra countered. "You had the courage to take a risk, to trust a stranger. That takes strength." "We saved each other then," Cora said, and Ezra smiled. "I can live with that." They sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. On the way back, Ezra held her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, and Cora thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. She thought about Thomas, and she sent a silent prayer of gratitude to him, wherever he was. He had been a good man, and he had brought her west, which had ultimately led her to this moment. She hoped he would understand. She thought he probably would. 2 weeks later, as promised, Ezra prepared to go into Taos. He loaded his mules with the pelts he had accumulated, dozens of beaver and fox and marten furs that would fetch good prices. Cora helped him pack supplies for the journey, and she tried not to let him see how anxious she was about his leaving. The night before he was set to go, they sat by the fire after supper, and Ezra reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He handed it to Cora, and she saw it was a carved wooden figure of a mule, tiny and perfect, down to the bridle and packs. "So you do not forget about me while I am gone," he said with a small smile. "As if I could," Cora replied, closing her fingers around the carving. "Ezra, be careful, please." "Always am," he said, "but I will be extra careful knowing you are waiting for me." The next morning dawned cold and clear. Cora woke before sunrise and found Ezra already up, moving quietly around the cabin as he gathered his things. She made coffee and biscuits, and they ate together in the pre-dawn darkness. When it was time for him to go, they walked outside together. The mules were loaded and ready, stamping their feet and snorting in the cold air. Ezra checked the packs one more time, then turned to Cora. He looked at her for a long moment, his pale eyes serious in the growing light. Then he stepped forward, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was soft and gentle, a question as much as a statement. Cora felt her entire body respond, warmth flooding through her despite the cold morning air. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid muscle and the rapid beat of his heart. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Ezra said, his voice rough. "I have wanted you to," Cora admitted. Ezra smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I will be back in 4 days, 5 at most. You have everything you need?" "Yes," Cora said. "I will be fine. Just come back to me." "Wild horses could not keep me away," Ezra promised. He kissed her again, quick and hard, then forced himself to step back. He took up the lead rope for the mules and started down the trail. Halfway down, he turned and looked back. Cora was still standing on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, watching him. He raised a hand and she waved back. Then he disappeared into the trees. Cora stood on the porch for a long time after he was gone, her fingers touching her lips, replaying the kiss in her mind. Finally, she went back inside and set about her day's work. But everything felt different now. The cabin felt empty without Ezra's presence, too quiet, too still. She found herself touching the little carved mule in her pocket, drawing comfort from it. The first day passed slowly. Cora kept busy, cleaning things that did not need cleaning, cooking a stew that was far too much for one person. She sat by the fire that evening and tried to read, but she could not focus on the words. She kept thinking about Ezra on the trail, hoping he was safe, wondering if he was thinking about her too. The second day was worse. Cora woke to find snow falling, the first real snow of the season. It was not heavy, just a dusting that turned the world white and clean, but it made her worry. Was Ezra caught in it? Was he cold? She told herself not to be foolish. Ezra had survived winters in these mountains long before she came along. He knew what he was doing. On the third day, the snow stopped, and the sun came out, turning everything into a dazzling wonderland. Cora forced herself to go outside to do the chores that needed doing. She tended the mules that Ezra had left behind, 2 older animals that were not strong enough for the journey to Taos. She checked the traps closest to the cabin and found a rabbit, which she skinned and dressed for supper. She split wood, which was hard work and left her arms aching, but at least it kept her occupied. That evening, as she sat by the fire, she heard a sound outside. Her heart leaped, thinking Ezra had come back early, but when she opened the door, she saw a large black bear at the edge of the clearing, attracted by the smell of the rabbit she had dressed. Cora's blood ran cold. Ezra had warned her about bears, had told her they were active this time of year, trying to fatten up before hibernation. She grabbed the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The bear startled and ran off into the trees, and Cora stood on the porch, shaking, the rifle heavy in her hands. She barely slept that night, jumping at every sound, convinced the bear was coming back. She kept the rifle beside the bed and the fire burning high. By the time dawn came, she was exhausted and jittery, and she found herself praying that Ezra would come back today, that he would be safe and whole and here with her. The day dragged on. Cora tried to keep busy, but she found herself constantly looking down the trail, hoping to see Ezra's familiar figure. The sun moved across the sky, and still, he did not come. By late afternoon, Cora was fighting panic. What if something had happened to him? What if he had been hurt or robbed or worse? She stood on the porch, wrapped in her shawl against the cold, and stared at the empty trail until her eyes ached. Just as the sun was setting, painting the snow gold and pink, she saw movement. 3 mules came around the bend, and leading them was Ezra, tall and solid and real. Cora felt something break loose in her chest, relief so intense it made her dizzy. She ran down the steps and across the clearing, not caring about the cold or the snow, and Ezra dropped the lead rope and caught her as she threw herself into his arms. "Hey," he said, his voice warm with surprise and pleasure. "I'm here. I'm all right." "I was so worried," Cora said, her face pressed against his chest. "There was a bear, and it snowed, and I thought something had happened to you." "I'm sorry," Ezra said, holding her tight. "The snow slowed me down a bit. I should have been back yesterday, but the trail was tricky. But I am here now. I am safe." Cora pulled back enough to look at him, her hands cupping his bearded face. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but he was smiling at her with such warmth that it made her heart ache. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too," Ezra replied. "Every minute." Then he kissed her, and Cora forgot about the cold and her fear and everything except the feeling of his lips on hers, his arms around her, the solid reality of him. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless and grinning. "Come on," Cora said, taking his hand. "Let me help you unload. You must be exhausted and starving." They worked together in the fading light, unloading the mules and settling them in the lean-to. Ezra had sold all his pelts for good prices, and he had brought back supplies, sugar and flour and coffee, fabric for a new dress for Cora, ammunition, a bottle of whiskey to celebrate. Inside, Cora heated the stew she had made, and they ate together, Ezra telling her about his trip to Taos. "Ran into a few folks who asked about you," he said. "Word had spread about Thomas dying. They were surprised to hear you were with me." "I imagine they were," Cora said dryly. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that you are staying with me for the winter, and that my intentions are honorable." Got a few raised eyebrows, but most folks seemed to think it was practical enough. "Old Mrs. Henderson told me I better marry you soon before I ruin your reputation completely." Cora laughed. "She's probably right." Ezra set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. "Cora, I know it has not been long, but I know how I feel. I love you, and I want to marry you if you will have me. We can wait until spring if you want, make it proper, or we can do it sooner. Whatever you want, I will do." Cora felt her eyes fill with tears. "You love me?" "More than I thought possible," Ezra said simply. Cora reached across the table and took his hand. "I love you too, Ezra, and I do not want to wait until spring. Life is too uncertain. I want to be your wife. I want to build a life with you." Ezra's face broke into a smile so wide and joyful that it made him look years younger. He stood and pulled her up with him, then kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing, giddy with happiness. "We will need to go to Taos," Ezra said. "Find a preacher, maybe wait a few weeks until the next trip." "Or," Cora said slowly, "we could do what people in the wilderness do. Make our vows to each other, here, under God in the mountains. It would be legal enough if we registered it later." Ezra looked at her, his eyes searching. "You would want that? Just us?" "Just us," Cora confirmed. "This is our life, our choice. I do not need a church full of people. I just need you." So that night, with the fire burning high and the snow falling softly outside, they spoke their vows to each other. There was no preacher, no witnesses except the mountains and the stars, but the words they spoke were real and binding, promises made from the heart. Ezra took both of her hands in his and looked into her eyes. Cora Bennett, I promise to love you and protect you, to provide for you and respect you, to stand by you through whatever comes, for as long as I live. Cora felt tears streaming down her face as she replied, Ezra Callahan, I promise to love you and support you, to build a home with you and share your burdens, to stand by you through whatever comes, for as long as I live. They had no rings, but Ezra pulled a leather cord from his pocket with a small silver charm, a tiny mountain peak that he had bought in Taos. He tied it around her wrist, his fingers gentle. Until I can get you a proper ring, he said. It is perfect, Cora whispered. Then Ezra kissed her, his wife now, and Cora kissed him back, her husband, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, the heat of the fire and the warmth of their love. That night, Ezra took down the curtain that had divided the cabin, and Cora went to him willingly, joyfully. He was gentle with her, patient and tender, his big hands careful as he undressed her. Cora had been with Thomas, but this was different, intense in a way that shocked her. Ezra worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, learning every inch of her, and Cora responded with a passion she had not known she possessed. When they finally came together, it was like coming home, a rightness that made everything else fall away. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Ezra's arms around her, Cora's head on his chest, and she had never felt so content, so complete. The winter came in earnest after that, harsh and unforgiving. The snow piled high around the cabin, and the temperatures dropped until the cold was a physical thing, biting and relentless. But inside, Cora and Ezra were warm and happy. They fell into the rhythms of married life, working together to survive the winter. Ezra still checked his trap lines, now teaching Cora to come with him, showing her the skills he had learned over years of living in the wilderness. Cora cooked and cleaned and mended, but she also learned to skin animals and tan hides, to identify tracks and read the weather. They talked for hours by the fire, learning each other's stories, their hopes and dreams. Ezra admitted that he had been lonely in the mountains, that he had told himself he preferred solitude because it was easier than admitting he wanted companionship. Cora told him about her dreams of having a family, children who would grow strong and free in this wild country. Ezra listened and held her close, promising her that they would build that life together. They made love often, sometimes with slow tenderness, sometimes with urgent passion. Ezra was endlessly fascinated by her body, and Cora reveled in the power she had over this strong, stoic man, the way she could make him lose control with a touch, a kiss. They learned each other's bodies the way they learned the mountains, thoroughly and completely, and the intimacy between them grew deeper with each passing day. By January, Cora was certain she was pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she felt different, a subtle shift in her body that she recognized. She waited to tell Ezra until she was sure, not wanting to get his hopes up prematurely. But one evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "There's a baby growing in here," she said softly. "Our baby." Ezra stared at her, his eyes going wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor," Cora said. "I think by summer you will be a father." Ezra let out a whoop of joy that startled her into laughter. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. When he pulled back, she saw tears in his eyes. "I am going to be a father," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Cora confirmed, her own eyes wet. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ezra said. He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her stomach, as though he could hear the tiny heartbeat within. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are already so wanted, so loved." Cora ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was happiness, she thought, this wild, unexpected, fierce happiness that she had found in the most unlikely place. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of preparation. Ezra became even more protective of Cora, insisting she not overwork herself, bringing her extra furs to keep her warm. He started building a cradle, carving it from pine and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Cora sewed baby clothes from soft fabric, tiny gowns and blankets, her hands moving steadily as she imagined the child who would wear them. When spring finally came, melting the snow and turning the world green again, Ezra took Cora back to Taos to see a doctor and to officially register their marriage. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, confirmed what Cora already knew. She was healthy, the baby was healthy, and she could expect to deliver sometime in late July or early August. They filed their marriage certificate with the territorial government, making their union official in the eyes of the law. A few people in town gave them disapproving looks, but most seemed to accept the situation. In the wilderness, practicality often trumped propriety. They spent a week in Taos, Ezra trading pelts and buying supplies, Cora enjoying the novelty of being around other people. But by the end of the week, both of them were eager to get back to their mountain. It was home now, theirs in a way that no other place had ever been. Summer arrived in a rush of warmth and color. The mountains bloomed with wildflowers and the streams ran high with snowmelt. Cora's belly grew round and full, and Ezra delighted in feeling the baby kick. His large hand splayed across her stomach, his face filled with awe. He insisted on doing most of the heavy work now, not wanting Cora to strain herself, and she let him, knowing it made him feel useful. On a hot afternoon in early August, Cora's labor began. She had been feeling restless all day, a low ache in her back that gradually intensified. When her water broke, she felt a moment of panic, but Ezra was there, calm and steady. He had helped birth animals before, and while he knew a human baby was different, he was not afraid. "You can do this," he told her, his voice firm and reassuring. "I am right here with you." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. It was hard and painful, and there were moments when Cora thought she could not go on. But Ezra never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. And when the baby finally came, a squalling, red-faced boy with a full head of dark hair, Cora felt a love so overwhelming it made everything else seem small. Ezra cut the cord with shaking hands, then wrapped the baby in a soft blanket and placed him in Cora's arms. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. You did so well." Cora looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and rosebud mouth, and felt tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." They named him Thomas Ezra Callahan, honoring both the past and the present. Thomas for the man who had brought Cora west, who had been kind even if he had not been the great love of her life. Ezra for the man who was her great love, who had saved her and given her a future. Little Thomas was a healthy baby, loud and demanding, and he fit into their lives as though he had always been there. Ezra proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to soothe the baby when he cried, changing soiled cloths without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and staring at him in wonder. Cora watched them together and felt her love for Ezra deepen even further. He was everything she had ever wanted in a partner, strong and gentle, protective and kind. The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, a girl they named Sarah, who arrived 2 years after Thomas, and another boy they named James 3 years after that. The cabin grew crowded, and Ezra built an addition, another room for the children to sleep in. Their life was hard, the winters brutal, the work endless, but it was good. The children grew strong and wild, learning to trap and hunt from their father, to read and write from their mother. Ezra continued to trap, but he also started raising a few cattle and horses, diversifying so they were not completely dependent on the whims of the fur market. Cora tended a large garden and preserved food for the winter, her skills honed by years of practice. They made trips to Taos a few times a year to sell pelts and buy supplies, and the children looked forward to these trips with excitement. Through it all, Ezra never once left in the early morning without kissing Cora goodbye. Even on the coldest mornings, when he had to check trap lines or tend to animals, he would stop by the bed where she lay warm and drowsy and press his lips to hers. It was a ritual, a promise renewed every single day. "I love you. I will come back to you. You are mine, and I am yours." "Do you have to go out today?" Cora would sometimes murmur, reaching up to pull him back down for another kiss. "Mules need loading. Pelts need checking," Ezra would reply, but his eyes would be soft, his smile indulgent. but I will be back before you know it." And he always was. No matter how far he went or how long he was gone, Ezra always came back to her, his kiss upon leaving and his kiss upon returning bookends to their days. As the children grew older, they started to tease their parents about their affection. Thomas, who grew into a serious boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determination, would roll his eyes when he caught them kissing. Sarah, bright and precocious, would giggle and declare that they were being silly. James, the baby, would just grin, soaking up the love that filled their home. But even as they teased, the children never doubted that they were loved, that their home was secure. They saw how their father looked at their mother with adoration and respect. They saw how their mother looked at their father with love and trust, and they grew up understanding what a real partnership looked like, what real love was. When Thomas was 12, he asked his father how he had known that Cora was the one he should marry. Ezra had been cleaning a rifle, and he paused, considering the question. "I guess I knew because she made everything make sense," he said finally. "Before your mother, I was just going through the motions, surviving but not really living. She gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to come home at night. She made me want to be better, do better. That's how you know, son, when someone makes you want to be the best version of yourself, when you cannot imagine your life without them, that is love." Thomas had nodded solemnly, filing the information away for future use. As the years rolled on, Cora and Ezra grew older, their hair going gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard living. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and weathered storms. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands and talking about their day, their children, their life. "Do you ever regret it?" Cora asked one evening when she was in her 40s, the children all asleep inside. "Taking me in that day? Your life would have been simpler without me." Ezra turned to look at her, his pale eyes still as striking as they had been the first day she saw him. "Simpler, maybe," he said, "but emptier. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Cora Callahan. Every day with you is a gift." Cora leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. "You saved my life," she said softly. "No," Ezra corrected. "We saved each other." When Thomas, their eldest, was 18, he announced that he wanted to strike out on his own, to find his own path. Ezra gave him his blessing and a set of traps, and Cora packed him supplies and hugged him tight, whispering prayers for his safety. They watched him ride away, and Cora cried, but they were proud tears. They had raised a strong, capable young man who was ready to face the world. Sarah, at 16, was already being courted by a young rancher from a neighboring valley. Ezra did not like it, protective father that he was, but Cora reminded him that Sarah had a good head on her shoulders and would make her own choices. When Sarah was 18, she married the young rancher, and Ezra gave her away with tears in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. James, the baby, stayed at home the longest, helping his aging parents with the work that was getting harder for them. But eventually, he too found his path, becoming a guide for hunting parties that came up from the cities, wanting to experience the wilderness. Cora and Ezra found themselves alone again, their cabin quiet in a way it had not been for decades. At first it was strange, almost unsettling, but they adjusted, falling back into the rhythms they had established in those early days, just the two of them against the world. They slowed down, no longer taking on as much work, no longer pushing themselves as hard. Ezra still checked trap lines, but not as many. Cora still tended the garden, but a smaller one. They spent more time together, taking walks through the mountains they loved, revisiting the places that held memories. The high meadow where Ezra had told her about nearly dying in a blizzard, the stream where they had taught the children to fish, the clearing where they had built their first addition onto the cabin. On a morning in late autumn, when Cora was in her early 60s, she woke to find Ezra already up, moving slowly as he prepared for a short trip to check his nearest trap lines. She watched him from the bed, this man who had been her partner for nearly 40 years. His hair was white now, his beard shot through with silver, his face deeply lined. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Ezra," she called softly. He turned, a smile crossing his face when he saw she was awake. He came to the bed and sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "Morning, love. Did I wake you?" "No," Cora said. "I just wanted to see you before you left." Ezra leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held decades of love and devotion. "I will be back in a few hours. I love you." "I love you too," Cora said. "Be careful." "Always am," Ezra promised, just as he had 1,000 times before. Cora watched from the window as he loaded his pack mule, his movements practiced and efficient despite his age. She saw him pause and look back at the cabin, at her watching from the window, and he raised a hand. She waved back, and then he disappeared down the trail. She went about her morning chores, stoking the fire, making coffee, starting a stew for supper. But as the hours passed and Ezra did not return, a cold feeling began to settle in her stomach. He should have been back by now. The traps were close, an easy circuit that took only a couple of hours. By late afternoon, Cora could not stand it any longer. She bundled up against the cold and set out down the trail, following the route she knew Ezra would have taken. She found him at the third trap, sitting with his back against a tree, the mule standing patiently nearby. For a moment, she thought he was just resting, but as she got closer, she saw that his eyes were closed, his chest still. "No," she whispered, breaking into a run. "No, no, no." She fell to her knees beside him, taking his hand. It was still warm, but there was no pulse, no breath. His face was peaceful, as though he had simply fallen asleep. Cora felt a scream building in her chest, but what came out was a sob, raw and broken. She pulled him into her arms, cradling his head against her chest, rocking back and forth. "Please," she whispered, "please do not leave me. Not yet. We are supposed to have more time." But time, she knew, was not something they could control. Ezra had lived a long, full life. He had died in the mountains he loved, quickly and without suffering. It was, she thought through her grief, the kind of death he would have chosen if he could. But that did not make it hurt any less. She did not know how long she sat there, holding him. But eventually, the cold started to seep into her bones. She knew she had to get help, had to get Ezra home. She stood on shaking legs and took the mule's lead rope. She could not carry Ezra by herself, but she could bring the mule back to the cabin and get help from James, who lived only a few miles away. It took her hours to make the journey, and by the time she stumbled up to James's door, it was nearly dark. James took one look at her face and knew. He did not ask questions, just grabbed his coat and helped her back onto the mule. They rode through the night, and James brought his father's body back to the cabin, laying him gently on the bed. The next days were a blur. Thomas and Sarah came as soon as they got word, and together the family prepared Ezra for burial. They laid him to rest on a hill overlooking the valley, a place where he could see the mountains he had loved for his entire life. Cora stood by the grave, flanked by her children and grandchildren, and she felt hollowed out, empty in a way she had not felt since before she met Ezra. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Cora began to find her way again. She stayed in the cabin, refusing her children's offers to come live with them. This was her home, hers and Ezra's, and she was not ready to leave it. She tended the garden, cooked her meals, kept the fire burning, and every morning she stood on the porch and looked down the trail, half expecting to see Ezra coming back, his kiss still warm on her lips. She lived for another 5 years, long enough to see all her grandchildren grow into young adults, long enough to see Thomas married and starting his own family. She was 80 when she passed, quietly in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Ezra for so many years. Her children found her in the morning, a peaceful expression on her face, and they knew that she had gone to join the man she loved. They buried her beside Ezra on the hill, their graves side by side, looking out over the mountains. On Cora's headstone, which Thomas carved himself, he wrote, "Cora Bennett Callahan, beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She was loved every day, and on Ezra's, already weathered by 5 years of mountain weather, Ezra Callahan, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he never left without kissing her. Goodbye. The cabin still stands, though it is empty now, a monument to the love that filled it for so many years. Sometimes, on cold autumn mornings, when the sun is just starting to rise and the mountains are wrapped in mist, people swear they can see 2 figures on the porch, a tall, broad-shouldered man with long hair and a slender woman wrapped in a shawl. They stand close together, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, watching the sunrise over the mountains they loved. and if you listen very carefully, in the quiet moments before the world wakes up, you can hear it. The sound of a man's voice, deep and rough, saying, "I love you." The sound of a woman's soft reply. The sound of a kiss, a promise renewed, a love that not even death could diminish. Because some loves are like the mountains themselves, enduring, unchanging, eternal. And the love between Cora and Ezra Callahan was one of those loves, forged in hardship and tested by time, but never, ever broken. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the stories they told, in the lessons they learned. It lived on in the cabin where they built their life, in the mountains where they found their home. In the memories of those early mornings when a mountain man would load pelts on pack mules at dawn, but never left without kissing her goodbye first. Their story became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations. Young couples would hike up to the cabin, now maintained as a historical site, and stand on that porch, imagining what it must have been like. They would visit the graves on the hill and leave wildflowers, honoring a love that had transcended the ordinary and become something extraordinary. Thomas, Ezra, and Cora's eldest, often told his own children about his parents, about the way his father had looked at his mother every single day as if she was the most precious thing in the world, about the way his mother had smiled at his father, a smile that held contentment and joy and deep, abiding love. He told them about the ritual of the goodbye kiss, about how no matter what was happening, no matter how busy or distracted his father was, he always stopped to kiss his mother before he left. That, Thomas would say, is what real love looks like. It is not grand gestures or dramatic proclamations. It is showing up every single day. It is the small kindnesses, the daily devotions, the choice to love even when it is hard. Your grandmother and grandfather taught me that, and I'm passing it on to you. And his children listened, and they carried those lessons forward, and the love between Cora and Ezra Callahan lived on, rippling out like waves on water, touching lives for generations to come. In the mountains of New Mexico, where the air is thin and the sky is impossibly blue, where the aspens turn gold in autumn and the snow falls deep in winter, there is a story. It is a story about a widow who lost everything and a mountain man who found her. About two lonely souls who came together and built something beautiful and lasting. About morning kisses and loaded mules, about hardship and joy, about a love that endured through decades and beyond death. It is a true story, carved into the landscape itself, written in the stones of a grave and the timbers of a cabin and the memories of all who came after. And on quiet mornings when the world is still and the mountains are waking up, you can feel it. The echo of that love, strong and true and enduring. The mountain man loaded pelts on pack mules at dawn, but he never left without kissing her goodbye first. And she waited for him to return, as she always did, because that is what love does. It waits, it hopes, it endures, forever and always until the mountains themselves crumble into dust.